Descartes. So, for our outline, introduction first. Why are we discussing René Descartes? So René Descartes was a French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist. He attempted to merge science, mathematics, ethics, philosophy, theology into one using deduction. To quote from the man himself, thus all philosophy is like a tree, of which metaphysics is the root, physics the trunk, and all the other sciences the branches that grow out of this trunk, which are reduced to three principles, namely medicine, mechanics, and ethics. So, he saw philosophy as the trunk of a tree, of the root of a tree. He saw science as the trunk of the tree, and then he saw medicine, mechanics, and ethics, mechanics being sort of like engineering here, as the branches of the tree. And then finally, ethics are the leaves of the tree. So it's sort of a strange conception of knowledge, to be sure. But the reason why that's important for us is because that means René Descartes tries to build a whole edifice of philosophy. He tries to build an edifice is like a great building. So he starts from the ground up and he tries to build a great building of philosopher. And to quote Russell, this sort of effort hadn't happened since Aristotle. So it's a pretty exciting effort. Descartes doesn't do it perfectly, but he does it pretty well, and he's the first one to try to do it for like 1900 years. So it's pretty impressive. So why are we discussing Descartes? Because Descartes is the first original complete philosopher since Aristotle. All right. So by the way, does Descartes' tree metaphor make sense to everyone? Everyone understands it? All right. Good. So we'll see exactly how Descartes tries to build his philosophy from the ground up. But as long as you understand, that's what he's doing. So Descartes' biography. So this is the man here. Has a bit of a smug look on his face. So he was born to a wealthy, non-noble family in 1596. So he was alive at the same time as Bacon, but younger than him. He was sickly, so rather weak, but well and broadly educated by the standards of the time. So, of course, it means he learned the science of Aristotle as well as theology. As a young man, he joins the military. And there's actually a great story about him. So he's in the Bavarian army. And so Bavaria is now a part of Germany. So he was in the Bavarian army, and Bavaria had these big ovens. And I think they were used for like warming food. They weren't used for cooking food because they were the size of rooms. And so it was very cold, and he shut himself in a big oven. And so that day he stayed in the oven, and he had 3 visions, which revealed to him analytical geometry and a method for applying mathematics to philosophy, as well as the idea that all sciences are based on the same truth. So all of philosophy is like a tree. So just remember, if you guys are ever having trouble in philosophy, trouble understanding things, put yourself in an oven for a day. It works for Descartes. I've never tried it myself, but it might work for you as well. After he left the army, Descartes moved to the Netherlands in 1628, so he could have freedom to publish his works. And this is where he published all his most important works, except for a complete book on physics, because Galileo had recently been condemned by the church, and Descartes was many things, but he wasn't the world's bravest man. He wasn't that willing to get in trouble with the church. So finally, Descartes died in 1650 after moving to Sweden to tutor the Queen Christina in philosophy. And as the story goes, Descartes was habitually a late riser. He would get up at like 10 a.m., 11 a.m. Christina insisted on him getting up at 5 a.m. in order to tutor her. And it took approximately, I think, like 2 years for that schedule to kill him. That's the story. I don't think Descartes actually died from getting up too early. But I don't know. On a morning like this, when it's cold and rainy, I certainly can understand that feeling. All right. So, basic biography of Descartes. Descartes was a lifelong teacher and writer of philosophy, occasionally angering people with his radical ideas. All right. So I think that's pretty straightforward. Shouldn't be too many questions about life of Descartes. So let's go on to the historical background. So for Descartes' historical background, I thought I'd just cover the places he lived when he lived. So he was born in France, served in the Dutch States Army and the Army of Bavaria. He lived in Paris, then the Dutch Republic, and then died in Sweden. So he goes France, through here, back here, Dutch Republic, and then dies here. So let's take a tour of Europe during the 1600s and see where exactly Descartes was going and what things were like where he went. So, France during the 1600s. So Descartes lives during the reign of 3 kings: King Henri IV, King Louis XIII. Man, I'm forgetting my troisième. Yes, I'm forgetting my French. All right, King Henry IV, King Louis XIII, and King Louis XIV, or King Louis XIV. Man, this is bad. I need to remember my French again. It's been a while. So, first things first, let's talk about King Henry IV. So he reigns from 1589 to 1610. He's a Protestant. And as you guys should know from your history classes, being a Protestant king of France during this time, or really during any time, but especially during this time, is difficult and also quite dangerous. So he faces 12 assassination attempts after he assumes the throne. Probably tiring of people trying to kill him, he converts to Catholicism, also allows religious freedom for Protestants. Later on, he's loved for his tolerance of both Protestants and Catholics, as well as his civic works. He built the college which René Descartes attended. During the time, he was not so loved for this, and he died from assassination. So one of these assassination attempts finally got him. This is him. Looks like a pretty nice guy, but apparently not everyone would agree. So that's first king of France, second king of France, Louis XIII reigns from 1610 to 1643. He was only a child when he assumed the throne, so he needed advisors. His first advisor was his mother, who was a Medici, and infamous Italian family, who we'll talk about quite a bit when we talk about Machiavelli. She relied on Italians to help her in her regency, and regency is her being like taking over the throne when King Louis XIII is still too young. Bringing a bunch of Italians into France did not work well. France fell into chaos, and once Louis XIII became old enough, he kicked his mother out of France and he executed all his advisors. So not exactly a, well, not a nice time. People weren't particularly nice to their parents. His advisor was Cardinal Richelieu of Three Musketeers fame, if you've read the book or seen the movie. And Cardinal Richelieu helped transform King Louis XIII into the first absolute monarch by revoking the privileges of some of the nobles. And that's a pretty important political development, is absolute monarchy. I really wish I could talk about King Louis XIV, but his reign only started at the end of Descartes' life, so he didn't have a large impact. However, if you guys are interested in Game of Thrones or imperial politics or anything like that, you should definitely read about King Louis XIV because him and his court were fascinating. All right, so that's France during Descartes' life. Does that make sense to everyone? All right, great. So let's go on to the Dutch Republic. So by the way, in case you guys are wondering, I'll have John help me translate once we get to philosophy. So I think we're just gonna, it's just gonna be me for this historical background section. So let's talk about the Dutch Republic. So Dutch Republic exists from 1581 to 1795. Originally, it was part of the Holy Roman Empire, but unfortunately, the Holy Roman Empire lost control of it. It was economically very successful. The Dutch were great traders. You probably have heard of the Dutch East India Company. It had a stock exchange, which helped a lot with financing, first in the world. And it had a very powerful navy, which also helped economically. Any trading company or trading country, like England, for instance, needs to have a powerful navy. So its aggressive promotion of freedom of religion led to it becoming a site for many religious refugees, including Hobbes, Locke, and Spinoza. We'll talk about Locke. Remember, that's why Descartes ends up here. So a surprising amount of famous philosophers end up in the Dutch Republic. So by the way, you would think that when the United States was being formed, they would see the Dutch Republic and be like, wow, it's a republic and it promotes freedom of religion. It's like they would be very impressed by it, but they were not. In fact, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, said it exhibited imbecility in the government, discord among the provinces, foreign influences and indignities, a precarious existence in peace, peculiar calamities from war. So actually, That's a lot of tough words. John, can you help me translate that?
OK，就是说，大家一定会觉得，就是在欧洲大陆产生的新的荷兰的共和国一定是一个很有力量的新兴的政治体制，因为它不仅有民主，而且还有它的自由，然后还有它的宗教宽容。但是呢，其实很多人呢不是这样评论的。比如说这段话，他说：“你认为呢？荷兰共和国在欧洲的荷兰共和国提升了自由和宗教，将是美国的一个先导吗？”但是 James Madison 非常不高兴，他说呢，就是他说在政府的无能，然后呢还有在各个省间的不和，还有国外的影响和他在世界上遭受的不公，对于荷兰来说呢，它是一个在和平中非常奇怪的存在，并且呢，很特殊许多的灾难呢，也造成了许多战争的灾难呢，也造成了它的不和平。
All right, cool. So, do you guys get James Madison's criticism of the Dutch Republic? Do you understand? All right, cool. So yeah, so James Madison, not a fan. Descartes, on the other hand, evidently a big fan. And I appreciate the we at the end of that good work on the French. All right, let's talk about Bavaria. So remember, Descartes was in the Bavarian army. So Bavaria was one of the most important territories of the Holy Roman Empire. And the Holy Roman Empire stretches throughout a lot of Western Europe and encompasses some 25 million people, which is a lot of people back then. Although it had an emperor, the territories have a lot of independence, which means it's really hard to teach a history of the Holy Roman Empire because it's really complicated and everyone is always stabbing each other in the back, invading everyone else's country. So for right now, that'll be all I'll say about Bavaria, because the history is just a bit too difficult to teach in a short amount of time. However, one very nice part about Bavaria is they have lovely castles. This castle is after Descartes' time. This is a 19th century castle, although there are some somewhat less nice castles made during Descartes' time. So by the way, if this castle looks familiar to you, that's because Disney based some of its castles off this, including the one in Beauty and the Beast. So this is the Beauty and the Beast castle in Bavaria, and you can actually go and visit. I actually don't know if the one in Disneyland is based off this or not. Probably is in some ways. I know the one in Beauty and the Beast is directly based off that. In fact, right here, you remember the Beast and Belle dance together. So that's Bavaria. And lastly, in our historical background, let's talk about Sweden. So this is our man Descartes teaching Queen Christina of Sweden. This is obviously painted well after Descartes dies. So when Descartes moves to Sweden, Sweden was in the midst of transforming itself from a relevant poor country in Northern Europe to dominant power in Northern Europe after having liberated itself from the Danes. So it was going from poor and weak to rich and powerful, and it managed to do so by freeing itself from Denmark. So over the next several centuries, Sweden decides to basically invade every country around it. It goes from having no wars to basically having every war, and then finally decides it doesn't like war so much after it's defeated by Russia, And the last time it was officially at war was 1814. So it's pretty much a period of like 200 years of constant warfare for the Swedes, and then they give it up. It's sort of a strange period in history. All right. So that's the historical background. To sum it up, Descartes lived during a time where European countries were constantly battling metaphorically and literally for power. So sometimes it was just through wars, sometimes it was just through diplomacy or religious attempts, but they were always looking for power. So it's an exciting and dangerous time for everyone. All right. So that's the historical background. Does everyone understand the historical background? All right, great. So now into the interesting stuff. Let's discuss Descartes' philosophy. So we're going to have to take it piece by piece. The most important thing to remember is that he's trying to build everything from the ground up. So from the roots to the leaves of the tree. And everything he's building up mathematically and by deduction. He's not Bacon. He doesn't believe in induction. And so you guys might have heard of his famous saying, cogito ergo sum, before. If you haven't, well, you will learn what it means and why it matters pretty soon. All right. So let's talk about Descartes' methodological skepticism. So Descartes uses skepticism as a means for establishing absolute knowledge. Skepticism here being doubting things. So he believes the syllogisms of Aristotle, Socrates, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. It's a syllogism, right? Can only exist in varying states of probability. So they can only be more or less true, and all of them, insofar as they try to express truths about the world, rely on sensation. So any of them that try to say something about the world as it exists, like if they say trees have leaves, they rely on sensation. You have to see the leaves on the trees. So Descartes says this means that they're unreliable, they're not particularly fruitful. So remember, it's a similar criticism to Bacon, that they're barren, and they're on weak foundation. So Descartes needs something better. So let's start by deciding what we know to be true and what can be doubted. We're going to build our foundation from what we know to be true. Well, what can we know to be true? Not much. What can we doubt? Almost everything. So you can doubt sensation because you can say, well, I don't know whether I'm asleep or I'm awake right now. So I think I see leaves on a tree, but in fact, I might be asleep and dreaming leaves on a tree. And Descartes says, in the past, I remember I've had dreams so realistic that I could have sworn they were true. And when I woke up, I was very surprised to find out that I was dreaming. So how do I know that's not happening right now? What else can be doubted? Well, Descartes says even logic and mathematics can be doubted. Because, first of all, he makes mistakes sometimes in math. Sometimes he adds numbers correctly. And how does he know that he's not adding numbers incorrectly all the time? It's possible that there's some demon, or as Descartes calls him, an evil genius. There's some demon who's interfering with Descartes' thought processes. So every time he tries to add 5 plus 7, the demon pokes at his head and makes him add it incorrectly. So this is difficult. pretty quickly, Descartes is doubting almost every part of himself. So, what can't be doubted? Only one thing: the existence of a thinking part of us. Even if everything we know, we think, we feel, and know is wrong, even if when you think 5 plus 5 equals 10, you might be wrong, even if you're wrong that leaves are on trees, even if you're wrong that, well, say anything, you have to be wrong. There's some part of you that's wrong. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Or in French, je pense, donc je suis. I think, therefore I am. So just remember, this comic, although funny, isn't the right way of interpreting what Descartes is saying. Descartes isn't saying if he stops thinking, he doesn't exist. He's saying he can prove he exists because he thinks. Because there's some part of him that's wrong. Even if he's wrong about everything, there's some part of him that's wrong. So that's Descartes' opinion. By the way, Russell in the pre-reading says Descartes overstates this case. He says he shouldn't have said, I think, therefore I am. He should have just said, there are thoughts. He says Descartes has no way of proving that there's a thinking part of him. Says there's only thoughts which are wrong. You can decide for yourself what you believe. All right.
So there's a question why there are homes from Descartes' head.
Okay. So this is Descartes' evil genius. I imagined Descartes as his own evil genius. So the mirror version of Descartes. All right. So I'm going to have John translate this first section of Descartes' philosophy for me.
对，刚才 Trevor 已经把笛卡尔的认识论，就是他关于知识的判断，给大家简单介绍了一下。那简单的说呢，笛卡尔就是把他的知识分成两部分，第一部分是从感官而来的，另一部分是从理性而来的。但是对于笛卡尔来讲，这两部分的知识都不是十分可靠的。第一，我们感官得来的知识当然不是可靠的，你甚至不能说你现在是不是在做梦，或者你现在是不是在有幻觉。那你的理性呢，同样也未必是正确的。我们总以为我们做的数学题是不会有错的，但是笛卡尔觉得，为什么你能够证明不会是有这样子一个恶魔？他在每次你计算5+7的时候，他都扰乱你，并且他让全世界的人都得出一个错误的答案呢？所以在这样的情况下，那似乎关于我们的思维，关于我们的想法，没有什么是正确的。那于是笛卡尔有了他非常著名的那句话，就是我思故我在，就是说当一切见到的东西、听到的东西和思考的东西都有可能是错误的时候，但是至少有一个东西没有错误，就是我还在思考这些东西。那因为我还在思考这些东西，所以这些思考的东西呢，就预设了其实我是存在的，因为毕竟思考还在继续。但是这也招来罗素的反驳。罗素说，其实笛卡尔加了一个非常强的论证，我们其实不能确定我们存在，我们能确定的是那里有一些念头，就是我们在思考的这些东西正在被思考，但是从那些正在被思考的东西正在被思考，并不能推导出有一个主体正在思考，这是罗素的反驳，当然也是一个非常强的反驳。至于大家要接受笛卡尔的强解释还是罗素的强反驳，那就是我们自己的选择了。都清楚了吗？
All right, great. So we've covered the foundation of.
Should I explain the cartoon? 大家都看懂那个漫画了吗？
All right. So we've discussed the foundation of Descartes' belief. It's the one thing he knows in the world, that some part of us thinks. So this is the one thing he knows. Now, we need to build up everything else from here. Remember, Descartes is trying to establish knowledge, so it's good we now have our roots. It's good we now have our base of knowledge. What else is there? Well, next question we're going to ask, how do we know the rest of the world? Because we seem to go through the world pretty well most of the time, and it seems very real. So that's sort of like a weird thing, right? If we can't prove that we know any of the world, why does it seem so real to us? Well, Descartes' answer is although we think we know the world through our senses, we really know it through our mind. So for instance, if you take a piece of wax and you bring it close to a fire, so a piece of wax like this, bring it close to a fire, it'll change in look, smell, and temperature, but you'll still see it as the same piece of wax. So if you took this and you melted it, then it would look different, it would smell different, and it would have a different temperature, but you'd still recognize it as the same. So Descartes says we don't really perceive through our senses, we perceive through our mind. So that makes sense according to Descartes. He's building up his theory of knowledge, and he says some part of us thinks, the same part of us which thinks is the part which allows us to interact with the world. So that's the reason why the world seems so real to us, because it's the part of us which thinks, which is actually letting us interact with the world. All right. John, you want to quickly explain this?
Yes. I just have a question. What
Yes.
does Descartes mean when he says that when the wax changes its form, it's a proof of the unreliability of our sensation? Why it's unreliable?
So it's not so much that sensation is unreliable. It's more that when the wax changes, he says if we were really relying on recognizing wax based on how it looked or how it smelled, if that's really how we went through the world, then we would think it's a totally different object. Every time something changes shape or changes smell, we would think it's a different object, but we don't. So Descartes' answer to how we go through the world so well and why it seems so real is we recognize objects by thinking about them.
Thank you. So something under that surface characters of an object.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, I'll do the translation. So 所以笛卡尔说，我们在这个世界上，虽然说无论是感官的，还是我们理性的思考得来的结果都不是可靠的，但是很明显的，笛卡尔还是比较偏向所谓的理性得来的知识。对于笛卡尔来说，如果感官得来的知识是可靠的话，那我们无法解释。比如说，当我们手中有一块固体的蜡，因为我们平时见到的蜡总是固体的，但是它遇到火的时候，它可能融化，它可能变形，它可能甚至改变颜色，但是我们都一直认为它是一团蜡。能把这些不同的形式、不同的质料、不同的感官材料组合在一起的，笛卡尔说，最终还是我们的理性。所以，我们知识的最终来源一样是我们的理性。Someone asks that the changing of the wax is gradual.
Yeah, so Descartes actually addresses that. So he says, yeah, it'd be one thing if you saw it changing, but say you left the room completely. You left the room for like 2 hours, came back, and you saw the wax completely changed. You didn't see it in the process of changing, it's just now totally different.
Yeah, great.
So that's Descartes' answer. All right. So can move on past perception. You guys understand? All right, good stuff. So we're not going to go through Descartes' next argument. So Descartes' next argument is, why can we trust our perception? And his answer is, God is too good to deceive us, which is not particularly, if you're religious, that might be a good answer, but as philosophers, that seems like a pretty shoddy answer, that just God is too good. And he also realizes that he hasn't proved God yet, so then he just uses Aquinas' proofs for God. So neither of those are particularly good. We've already covered Aquinas' proofs for God and the trouble with it, and then, basing perception on that is not great. So it is interesting to think about Augustine's. You remember St. Augustine's idea about the divinity of perception, and why Augustine thought that we could trust our perception was because God granted it to us. So it's related to that, which is interesting, but other than that, there's no point in discussing it. Just assume that we can trust our perception for the purposes of Descartes' argument. All right. So now that we've covered that, so we've covered there's a thinking part of us. We see the world through the thinking part of us, and we just have to assume that we can trust our perception. So the next question that Descartes covers is, we're thinking beings. So it seems then there are two parts of us. There's the thinking part of us and the being part of us. Thinking part, the mind, or perhaps the soul, and the being part, the body. So these two interact, right? Loud noises give you headaches. So loud noises go in through your ears and impact your mind. And that makes it hard to think. On the other hand, you can also use your mind to decide to move your arm to, like, pick up a glass. So here the mind is impacting the body. So they have to interact somehow. In order for us to move, or in order for us to get headaches and make it difficult to think, they have to interact. But they can't be the same thing. So you can argue about it from a religious perspective. The soul ascends to heaven and is immaterial, and the body is material. So that would be the religious perspective, right? And then the logical perspective would be, the mind isn't found anywhere in the body. And also, the body is deterministic, right? It's based on the laws of physics. So that leaves no room for free will. If our body is just totally determined by the laws of science, how can we decide to do things? How does the mind decide to do things? So this is a difficult question. So they have to be separate, and they have to interact. But how? How do they interact? In other words, where's the point of contact? So Descartes raises this fascinating question, and then he completely bungles it. He messes it up. He says the point of contact is the pineal gland, which is this little thing here, called the pineal gland because it looks like a very tiny pine tree. Pineal, pine. which unfortunately has nothing to do with the soul at all. It's actually with the production of melatonin, which regulates your sleep cycle. So Descartes has a great question and a not great answer. All right. So, John, you want to?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, Trevor 刚才谈到了，就是很重要的一点，在笛卡尔的哲学里，就是身心问题。那么我们看到，就是在当时的人世界观里，人是由身体和灵魂两个部分构成的，他们是某些程度上可以分开的两个物理性的实体。那么，问题是我们的灵魂和我们的身体，它们不是偶然结合在一起，它们是有很强烈的互动的。比如说，当我们在听到很强烈的声音的时候，我们的头也会痛，这就是所谓的物理世界。我们的身体影响到我们的灵魂，那或者说我们的灵魂也能指挥我们的身体运动。那身体和灵魂明显是连接在一起的。对于笛卡尔来说，那要连接在一起就必须有一个物理的连接点，那应该是在哪里呢？就是笛卡尔找到了大脑正中央的一个部位，叫做松果体的一个地方。然后这个地方呢，笛卡尔声称它其实就是灵魂和身体的连接的点。然后呢，在人死后呢，这个连接点就消失了，然后灵魂呢就会离开身体。这是笛卡尔给出的解释。明白了吗？都？
All right. Great. So that covers all of Descartes' thinking about the mind and whatever. So in terms of Descartes' other philosophy, let's cover that. So this isn't a mathematics course, so I won't go too into Descartes' mathematics, but it does relate a lot to his philosophy, and he's also really a great mathematician. So he's one of the pioneers of analytic geometry. So he uses algebra to describe geometry. It relates to his philosophy because algebra, in his opinion, is important because it's rigorous and abstract. He sees geometry like a triangle that's not so abstract, and he thinks it's not philosophical enough. So he has a very philosophical reason for why he likes algebra so much. And then his main mathematic achievement, or the one he's most famous for at least, is the Cartesian coordinate plane. So x, y, and you can graph, right? Slope, y-intercept. I'm assuming you guys all learned this a long time ago. What you might not know is this part, Cartesian, carts, that comes from Descartes. So he is the biggest influence on this. So whether you love the Cartesian coordinate plane or hate it, you can thank one René Descartes for it. So this is actually a pretty big mathematical achievement on his part, because it's very hard to imagine modern mathematics without something like this. All right, so that seems pretty clear. So let's go on, lastly, to Descartes' physics, which are not quite as good as Descartes' mathematics. So he has a very mechanical understanding of physics and science, which is an improvement certainly over Aquinas. He uses geometrical understandings of physical bodies. So this is reasonably similar to what you did in physics class. So he has laws of motion, and then he talks about how they would apply to this object. So, you know, here, the geometry here is a parabola, and then he would apply it to this rock in a sling. So what makes them very, very weird is his justification for his laws of motion are all religious. So all of his justifications are references to God and how God wills certain laws of motion to be certain ways because that's a more perfect way. And perfect, remember, is a very complicated word for religious thinkers. So other bits of Descartes' laws of motion, he believed that all matter was composed of tiny parts, atoms, and you needed to understand matter by seeing how these tiny parts flowed and interacted with each other. Gravity was a sort of diffusion of these tiny parts. So a heavy object would sink through the tiny parts of matter until it hit the ground. So this was all part of atomism, which starts way back with the ancient Greeks. And if you read the pre-reading, Russell is very impressed with it. I am less impressed. It's better than Aquinas, but it's still not great science. So yeah, all right, cool. So John, you want to cover the physics of Descartes?
Yeah, just briefly.所以刚才 Trevor 介绍了笛卡尔的数学和物理学。笛卡尔的数学当然是非常重要的，就是他在数学史上留下了所谓的笛卡尔坐标系，就是我们高中学的数学的一半，就是所谓的解析几何那一部分。他之所以这样做，是和他一个信念有很大的关系，就是这个世界是可以被数学描述的。但是请注意，在笛卡尔之前，其实数学并不能太有效的描述这个物理世界，因为没有合理的和这个物理世界建立起联系的笛卡尔坐标系，而笛卡尔坐标系恰恰弥补了这一个空白。那还有他的物理学，我们知道笛卡尔的物理学受原子论的影响很大，当然不是一个现代的原子论，不是我们现在所理解的有原子核、有电子的原子，而是从古希腊沿袭下来的原子论。就是在原子论的框架里，笛卡尔就能解释，希望能够解释很多现象，比如说引力的现象。他认为引力的现象呢，当然就是那些比较重的原子希望往下落的一些过程。当然，这不是一个很成功的解释，但这是笛卡尔当时的物理学。有问题吗？
All right. So if everything is clear and good, all right. So Trey should have an accent going the other way. Accent grave. But I appreciate the effort nonetheless. All right. So philosophy, Descartes believed through a thorough application of logic, he could construct a foundation for all knowledge. So that's what he tried to do. All right, before we go into a background of Descartes' philosophy, let's take a 5-minute break. So I will see you guys back here at 10:02, and we will continue on with background to Descartes' philosophy and all that stuff. So yeah, use the restroom, get some food, and be back here at 10:02. All right. So, all right, I'm gonna get some food myself, but I'll be back quickly to answer questions. All right, so any questions about what we covered? Anything like that? Everything super clear? 我的世界非常清楚了吗？ Is that good? So it's just I mean, I think you guys must have covered this in math class. Use coordinates so you can describe the triangle mathematically. So for instance, another way of describing the triangle rather than using angles and lengths is you could also use slope and y-intercept and stuff like that, right? So that's just another, the two end up being equivalent. And that's sort of Descartes' point, is that algebra and geometry can be used, well, algebra can be used to describe geometry. All right. Any other questions? No? All set? All right. In that case, let us begin again. So, everyone can see my screen? All right.
If there were no Descartes, we should have learned much less mathematics.
Yeah,
True.
that's true. If there was no Descartes, you would have learned less mathematics, but the world would have been a very different place. All right. So on to the background of Descartes' philosophy. So this question, what influenced Descartes' philosophy? So Descartes' philosophy was, first of all, highly influenced by one Isaac Beeckman, who introduced him the Italian Renaissance, the Arabic scientific mathematic revival, which we've discussed before. And it was also influenced by the traditional scholastic training he received at La Flèche. And scholastic here is in the vein of Aristotle and Aquinas. That's the scholastic, right? So it's interesting to think about Francis Bacon and Rene Descartes. Although they were around the same time, actually lived at the same time, and although they both received scholastic training and rejected it, they came to very different solutions. And they had very different ideas about how to fix the problems with the scholastics, with Aquinas and Aristotle. So let us cover Isaac Beeckman. So he's not a major figure in philosophy, but he was a major figure for Descartes. He was a Dutch philosopher and scientist who taught Descartes when Descartes was a young soldier in Leiden, in Holland. So his impacts on Descartes were the ideas of atomism, the ideas of Galileo, and some of the Arabic mathematicians. And atomism, remember, is where you have these small parts that make up basically matter. So remember, like Descartes ends up describing gravity with atomism. The most important influence or impact that Beekman has on Descartes is he inspires Descartes towards this mathematical and mechanistic understanding of the world, that things work cause and effect, and this influences Descartes a lot as he learns about the other scientific discoveries being made during his time, such as the circulatory system of William Harvey, which, if you remember, was William Harvey was also Bacon's personal physician. So that's another connection between Bacon and Descartes. He was dressed. that was how they dressed at the time. All right, and this is Isaac Beekman worrying about some mathematic problem. By the way, so Descartes and Beekman had a very, very rough falling out, and they, even though Beekman was Descartes' mentor, by the end of his life, Descartes hated Beekman and actually disavowed him completely and said, "I never learned anything from him. He was, just such a bad guy." So not a particularly nice move on Descartes' part. So yeah, that's Beekman, and let's cover La Flèche and the scholastics. So La Flèche, as we mentioned, is founded by Henri IV as a Jesuit college. Remember, the Jesuits are they're Catholics, very highly educated Catholics. They follow Aquinas and Aristotle, and so the science that Descartes learns is what we've already learned from Aquinas, which is classification and causes, and has this teleological focus, which is this focus towards the ends. Descartes rejects it. This is very different from the mechanistic understanding of the world that he adopts. So I thought I'd just remind you guys a bit with a quote from the Quinque Viae. Sorry if this brings back bad memories. For motion is nothing else than a reduction of something from potentiality to actuality, but nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. Thus, that which is actually hot, as fire makes wood, which is potentially hot, to be actually hot, and thereby moves and changes it. So that's the science that Descartes learns, that actually hot things make potentially hot things hot. And so Descartes instead takes a very different approach. All right, John, you want to do a quick summary of background philosophy, and then we'll get into Descartes' philosophy itself.
Yeah. 两个很重要的精神导师，第一个是 Beckmann， 他当然教给了笛卡尔他的原子论，还有他关于这个世界的机械论和这个世界可以被数学解释这样子一个信念，我们看在之后的笛卡尔的坐标系中，发挥了很大的作用。然后还有一个老师就是 La Flèche， 然后他是一个天主教的耶稣会会士。然后我们知道耶稣会会士他的耶稣会会士所受的教育是非常完备的。事实上，他们不仅要学习文法，还要学习数学，很多自然的科学在晚中世纪和文艺复兴时期，他们是非常重要的一股天主教会的力量。那笛卡尔从他那里学到了非常多的托马斯主义的东西，比如说我们之前学到的4种证明上帝的办法。学到了关于潜能和实在论的这些亚里士多德主义的东西等等等等，这是笛卡尔的哲学背景。
All right, good stuff. And so we've covered background philosophy, Descartes influenced by the remnants of Aristotle's philosophy and by the science and mathematics of the Italians and the Arabs. So now on to Descartes' actual philosophy, meditations on first philosophy. So remember, the essential question that we're asking here is, how did Descartes argue? How did he write? How did he argue? So, Meditations on First Philosophy, first published in 1641 in Latin, and in 1647 in French. Descartes dies very soon after. There are 6 meditations in total. First 2 meditations are very highly regarded. Last 4, not so highly regarded. It's been a standard intro text in philosophy since Descartes' time. This is, by the way, a great cover here of Phoenix coming out of the fire. So really love old book covers. Like this is really cool, really well done. All right. So let's jump in. So gonna be the same thing as before. I'm going to read it directly, read simple English, and comment if there's any commentary to be made. And then John will translate it. All right. So it starts off with the preface to the University of Paris professors. And so he needs to talk to the University of Paris professors and say, why is he writing this book? And also another part of it, which is not so much said, is please don't get mad at me for writing this book. Because remember, Descartes is living in a time where people do get in trouble for writing things that are seen as heretical, and Descartes has doesn't want to end up in the same amount of trouble that, say, Galileo did. All right. So, starting with the direct English first. For although it is quite enough for us faithful ones to accept by means of faith, the human soul does not perish with the body, that the God exists, it certainly does not seem possible ever to persuade infidels of any religion, indeed, you may almost say of any moral virtue, unless, to begin with, we prove these 2 facts by means of the natural reason. So he says, we need to prove to non-Christians that there is a soul and that God exists. Because unlike us, unlike we, Christians, they won't accept it on faith. The only way we can prove it is by reason. So, second passage, and in truth, I have noticed that you, along with all the theologians, did not only affirm that the existence of God may be proved by the natural reason, but also that it may be inferred from the Holy Scriptures. The knowledge about him is much clearer than that which we have of many created things. As a matter of fact, it's so easy to acquire that those who have it not are culpable in their ignorance. So he says, it's okay to prove the existence of God by reason, because I've actually heard you say that it's very easy and obvious to prove him from the Scriptures, to prove God from the Scriptures, and that knowledge about God is much more obvious than a lot of things. So Descartes is really trying to cover his bases here. He starts off with saying, I'm only doing this to help convert non-Christians. And then he says, also, you do this yourself. I'm really just following along with you. I'm not doing anything too new and radical here, which is, of course, not true. He's doing stuff that's very new and very radical, but he really does not want to get in trouble. All right. John, quick translation of preface to the University of Paris professor.
Yes, 就是他在其实这个 preface 是 meditation 的一个序言，然后在这个序言里面，笛卡尔开始了他对上帝存在的哲学证明的辩护，就是说，如同当时很重要的哲学家，比如说阿奎那一样，笛卡尔也认为这个世界的对于上帝的证明可以有2种，一种呢是神奇的证明，那就是通过圣经来证明；另外一个就是自然的证明，就是通过所谓哲学的办法，甚至是数学、物理的办法来对上帝进行证明。 当时欧洲面临的不仅是基督教徒，也要面对异教徒。在面对异教徒的情况下，笛卡尔说，我们这些书就是尤为有必要的，因为我们要用大家共同的理性基础来证明上帝的存在。这是他在这个序言里面非常基本的一个想法。然后大家有没有问题呢？现在？
All right. So next up, Descartes writes a message to us, to the readers. He says, now that he's defended himself against the authorities, he needs to tell his readers why he's writing this. And he says, for these questions have always appeared to me to be of such importance that I judged it suitable to speak of them more than once. The road which I follow in the explanation of them is so little trodden, so far removed from the ordinary path, that I did not judge it to be expedient to set it forth at length in French and in a discourse which might be read by everyone, in case the feebler mind should believe it's permitted to them to attempt to follow the same path. So he says, these are really important questions that not enough people have really thought about, so I want to write about them. But they're really tricky questions, so I'm going to write about them in Latin so that other people, ordinary people, can't understand me, and ordinary people don't even try to understand me. It's pretty weird that he writes this because literally 6 years later he publishes a version in French. So I'm not, I have to assume that it doesn't sell as well as Descartes thought it would, and so now he just wants more money. It is a very strange introduction to a book, right? Being like, I've deliberately written this in a way that only educated people can understand me. Ordinary people shouldn't even try. And this is the French cover of Descartes' book. All right, so I think that's pretty clear, and I want to get into the philosophy itself. We've covered the prefaces. Descartes covers his bases. So now onto the philosophy. So big titles of the things which may be brought within the sphere of the doubtful. So these are things which may be doubted. So to read it directly, it is now some years since I detected how many were the false beliefs that I had from my earliest youth admitted as true, how doubtful was everything I had since constructed on this basis. From that time I was convinced that I must once and for all seriously undertake to rid myself of all the opinions which I had formerly accepted, commence to build anew from the foundation if I wanted to establish any firm and permanent structure in the sciences. So translate that into simple English. Many years ago, I realized that a lot of what I believed when I was young wasn't true. That worried me because a lot of my current beliefs are based on my old beliefs. I realized I needed to throw out my old beliefs and build up my beliefs all over again because it's like a house on rotten foundations. So this would seem a lot more believable as an actual motive for Descartes to write this if among his old mistaken beliefs he didn't include, for instance, the idea that he can trust his perception. As it is, we just have to accept this as like a convenient fiction. So this is his convenient fiction for why he's starting this. He's throwing out everything that's rotten, and he's going to build it up based on what's firm and permanent. And for that end, it will not be requisite that I should examine each in particular, which would be an endless undertaking, for owing to the fact that the destruction of the foundation of necessity brings with it the downfall of the rest of the edifice, shall only in the first place attack those principles upon which all my former opinions rested. So he doesn't need to examine each belief individually, but he only examines the foundation of all of them. And that's going to be enough. If he can remove the foundation of the rotten foundation, that'll bring down with it anything wrong that came from it. All right, John, translation?
第一篇沉思就是笛卡尔的沉思录，共分6篇。第一篇的沉思的标题，当然就是我为什么能够怀疑一切。我们知道，就是西方哲学里面一直有一个很奇怪，可能对我们来说很陌生的主题，就是找到一切知识的基础。至于这个基础是什么呢？笛卡尔之后会建立他的基础，但是可以知道的是，当这个基础不太牢靠的时候，我们会认为我们的知识其实来源都是不肯定的。比如说，当我们相信家庭，我们相信社会，能不能因为就是事情就是这样子，我们就去相信它呢？那对于笛卡尔来说，这是非常值得怀疑的一种态度。也就是说，我们要找到一种新的知识的基础。这是当然这种基础在笛卡尔幼年的时候，他认为他并没有取得，所以他说我要重新开始建筑我的知识的大厦。
All right.
大家有问题吗？现在可以快点提出来。
All right, good stuff. So, all up to the present time, I have accepted as most true and certain. I have learned either from the senses or through the senses. It is sometimes proved to me that these senses are deceptive, and it is wiser not to trust entirely to anything by which we have once been deceived. So, to translate this, he's always thought that his senses tell him the truth, but they don't. And so, much like once someone lied to him once, he would never trust them again. He's not going to trust his senses ever again, given that they've lied to him once. So here we have Jenga blocks. It's like it's uncertain, right? You can pull any one of these out and the whole thing topples. So this is a really radical start, right? Like he's at the very beginning already saying he's going to completely distrust his senses. So you have to imagine that his contemporaries reading this philosophy for the first time would be quite surprised to see him go so far as to distrust his senses. And we know that he's actually not just going to attack the senses, but he's going to attack reason itself. And he's going to surpass the Greeks. So you have to think at this point, this is already a very radical start to Descartes' philosophy. All right, quick translation.
OK， 大家看到右边的那个 Jenga 游戏吗？其实蛮好玩的一个游戏。但是 Trevor 这里要说的就是，我们的知识对于笛卡尔来说，就像一座非常不牢靠的大厦。甚至笛卡尔对知识的质疑超过了我们的想象，因为我们觉得，比如说古希腊人对于 sensation， 就是对于肉体的经验的知识的怀疑已经是很极端了，但是对于笛卡尔来说呢，甚至连我们用理性得到的结果，比如说数学的结果，比如说很多物理的结果，我们也要加以怀疑。假如说我们没有发现一个合适的知识论的基础。
All right. So, everyone's okay so far. Everyone understands so far. All right. Good stuff. So now we're actually going to get into the real philosophy here. So, at this moment, it does indeed seem to me that it is with eyes awake that I'm looking at this paper, that this head which I move is not asleep. It is deliberately and of set purpose that I extend my hand and perceive it, What happens in sleep does not appear so clear nor so distinct as does all this. But in thinking over this, I remind myself that on many occasions I have in sleep been deceived by similar illusions, and dwelling carefully on this reflection, see so manifestly that there are no certain indications which may clearly distinguish wakefulness from sleep that I'm lost in astonishment. So, although right now, he says, it seems like I'm awake, he remembers he's been asleep and thinking he was awake. So that doesn't qualify as proof that he can trust his senses. And by the way, it's interesting here that he doesn't use hallucinating instead of sleeping, which would have sort of been an obvious thing for us, and in later society, that is a common example that people use. But maybe at his point in time, hallucinations were something frightening, much more frightening than dreaming. All right, so I think this one's pretty clear. So let's go on. So here we've got big paragraph. So bear with me for both the reading the English directly and the translation. So now let us assume that we are asleep and that all these particulars, for example, that we open our eyes, shake our heads, extend our heads, and so on, are but false delusions. Let us reflect that possibly neither our hands nor our whole body are such as they appear to us to be. At the same time, we must at least confess that things which are represented to us in sleep, like painted representations, which can only have been formed as the counterparts of something real and true. Then this way, those general things are at least, well, for instance, eyes, a head, hands, and a whole body are not imaginary things, but things really existing. For the same reason, although these general things, to wit, a body, eyes, a head, hands, and such like, may be imaginary, we are bound at the same time to confess there are at least some other objects yet more simple and more universal, which are real and true. And of these things, just in the same way as with certain real colors, all these images of things which draw on our thoughts, whether true and real or false and fantastic, are formed. So in terms of simple English translation, we can dream things that aren't real and never happen. We can dream that we're extending our hands out, but at the same time, what we dream is based on things that actually exist. And so for the same reason, even though we might only be dreaming a red triangle, that's because red triangles exist. And that's where our dreams come from. We don't just make them up out of nowhere. So this is a very, it's Platonic, and also Aristotle takes it from Plato. It's the theory of forms, right? This idea that there are certain very basic things which do exist, these universal true things, like a red triangle. I don't know if I'm convinced by this, that everything in our dreams is made up of things which actually exist. But it's an interesting idea. So Descartes is saying here, maybe even if what I'm dreaming isn't happening, maybe at least it's based on something real. So he's saying maybe I'm not totally fair in saying that I could just be dreaming everything. So John, translate.
Okay, so 所以笛卡尔在他的第一思考中，他的 meditation 的第一章中，然后首先开始攻击梦境，因为我们在梦境中不能太分开梦境的真实和现实的真实，因为虽然我们现在可以狠狠的扎自己一下，说哇好痛，这不是在做梦，但是我们也经常在梦中做一样的事。所以呢，关于梦的真实，或者说经验的真实，或者说究竟是经验的真实还是梦的真实，我们并不能太明确的说明，所以我们的感官是很不可靠的。那在第二个例子中，他说，那我们想一想， 比如说，当我们在梦到一个三角形的时候，那似乎有一些元素是从真实的世界，取之而来的。但是虽然说这个观念仍然是我们在梦中构建出来的，所以关于这个关于知识或者关于概念的真实性，似乎在笛卡尔的第一章中，笛卡尔现在开始做了一些区分，就是有一些的观念似乎更加真实，而有一些观念似乎更加不真实。然后我们继续等待下面的论证。
All right. So, Descartes continues, having said this, that is possibly why our reasoning is not unjust when we conclude from this that physics, astronomy, medicine, and all other sciences which have as their end consideration of composite things are very dubious and uncertain, that arithmetic, geometry, and other sciences of that kind, which only treat of things that are very simple, very general, without taking great trouble to ascertain whether they are actually existent or not, contain some measure of certainty and an element of the indubitable. So he says, maybe from this, we can say that everything that's composite, or based from real world evidence, is uncertain. Maybe we could be dreaming all of that. So maybe we don't really know physics or astronomy or medicine, but maybe what we should say is that we do know arithmetic, geometry, or anything that just comes from deduction. So we can't doubt that. So by the way, this distinction between things that are composite and based on the real world and things that are simple and based on thinking, this distinction is drawn by a number of philosophers. Kant will take it the furthest and have an entire theory based around this distinction. So it's actually pretty interesting that Descartes brings it up, but he just brings it up very casually to further an argument here. He doesn't take it any further than what you say. Yeah.
So I have a simple question here. What does composite things mean? Does it mean that it's a things out of many things or a things out of experience and reason?
So he uses composite here because he has this idea of I didn't include this direct quotation, but his idea is things we see in our dreams are composed of things we have in real life, right? And he says, for instance, if you see a flying horse in your dream, you're thinking of that because it's a combination of wings and a horse, flying and a horse. So when he says composite things, he's thinking of the same sort of thing. Like physics is composed of things you already know put together. Astronomy, things you already know put together. And so that's why he contrasts composite with simple. So, make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much. 所以说，笛卡尔在这里就亮了底牌，就是我们刚才说，这个世界上有一些知识是更加真实，有一些知识更加不真实，至少我们是这样认为的。笛卡尔说，那是因为那些比较不真实的事情呢，是因为它们是一些混合物，比如说物理啊，比如说天文学，比如说医学这些东西研究的对象，它混合着很多种经验构成的一些对象实体，比如说星星，比如说人体。但是呢，相对而言，在数学和几何领域，对象就变得很简单，因为它们只有一些非常纯净的，甚至是不带经验的元素。所以在这些领域呢，我们关于研究对象的那些概念呢，就往往是非常清晰和可靠的，至少我们是这样认为的。大家都清楚了吗？
All right.
So the composite thing assume everything which is clear.
I don't really understand that question.
Yeah. 我觉得其实应该不是绝对真实事物的总和，而是 那些绝对真实的概念和一些经验性的东西的混合体。正是因为这种混合或者说混进了那些经验性的东西，让这些对象或者让这些混合的事物变成非常的不确定，并不是真实，而是非常的不真实。
So how that relates to Pythagoras is an excellent question, but we will cover that later. For now, we will continue on with Descartes' philosophy. But good reference. All right. So continuing on with Descartes' philosophy, and besides, as I sometimes imagine that others deceive themselves in the things which they think they know best, how do I know that I am not deceived every time that I have 2 and 3? Count the sides of a square, or judge of things yet simpler, if anything simpler can be imagined. But possibly God has not desired that I should be thus deceived. He is said to be supremely good. If, however, it is contrary to his goodness to have made me such that I constantly deceive myself, it would also appear to be contrary to his goodness to permit me to be sometimes deceived. Nevertheless, I cannot doubt that he does permit this. So this is Descartes addressing why he can't say that math or simple things are not subject to skepticism, why he knows them for sure. He says, sometimes I'm mistaken about things I think I know about. So for instance, Descartes might be mistaken about simple math. For instance, maybe even though he thinks he knows what 2 plus 3 equals, or how many sides a square has, he might be wrong. He's not sure. Now, a religious man might say, well, wait a minute, God would never allow this. God's too good to allow this. But Descartes says to this imaginary religious man, if God's too good to allow me to deceive myself all the time, you would think he'd also be too good to allow myself to deceive myself sometimes. But you know, Descartes makes simple math mistakes just like everyone does. So how does he know he's not making simple math mistakes all the time? By the way, just a brief commentary. In terms of philosophy, there's an interesting assumption here, that it's possible to be wrong about the sides of a square. So an interesting assumption that Descartes makes is that there is an actual number of sides to a square, and that's for a mathematician to discover, that it's not possible to just make up a number of sides of the square. So in other words, mathematics is discovered, not invented. So that's another issue which sort of comes up very tangentially to what Descartes is discussing here. But for right now, this is still all in line with his argument about doubting his reason. All right.
Yeah. 所以笛卡尔在这里丢出了他对理性的一个很无奈的一个质疑，就是说，当我们总觉得理性不会犯错，比如说一个内角都是90度的一个分闭图形一定是4边形吗？如果上帝想欺骗我们，我们会不会总是搞错这个数字呢？在这一点上，他只是提出了怀疑，但是他某种意义上是建议我们在实际上相信这个理性的作用，因为上帝是良善的，他不应该做这种欺骗。但是，即便神不做欺骗，但是这个怀疑仍然存在。这是笛卡尔对我们刚才说过，就是在经验和理性的2分中，笛卡尔对于理性这部分知识的一个比较弱的质疑。
Okay. So he says, that is why I shall not be acting amiss. If taking of set purpose a contrary belief, I allow myself to be deceived. For a certain time, pretend that all these opinions are entirely false and imaginary, till at last, having thus balanced my former prejudices with my latter, so that they cannot divert my opinions more to one side than to another, my judgment will no longer be dominated by bad usage or turned away from the right knowledge of the truth. For I am assured that there can be neither peril nor error in this course, that I cannot at present yield too much distrust, so I am not considering the question of action, but only of knowledge. So for the sake of argument, Descartes' going to assume that everything he believes and knows is false. And then he's going to find out the truth. He's not worried about the possibility of being unable to act because he's only doing this as a thought experiment. So I'm just going to continue here so we can finish first meditation. I shall then suppose not that God, who is supremely good and the fountain of truth, but some evil genius, not less powerful than deceitful, has employed his own energies in deceiving me. Shall then consider the heavens, the earth, colors, figures, sound, and all external things are not but the illusions and dreams of which this genius has availed himself in order to lay traps for my credulity. So insensibly of my own accord, I fall back into my former opinions, and I dread awakening from this slumber, lest the laborious wakefulness which would follow the tranquility of this repose should have to be spent not in daylight, but in the excessive darkness of the difficulties which have just been discussed. So he says, I'm going to literally deny that I know anything at all, and imagine that the devil or some evil genius is trying very, very hard to deceive me. He is going to make me believe wrong things. He's going to make me see wrong things. Every time I do math, he's going to make me do math wrongly. And having come up with this demon in his head, it actually seems like he frightens himself. He says, I'm really, now I like, it's like being asleep and like fearing waking up. Because he's like, when I wake up, I'm afraid that it's going to be some, demon waiting for me. So it's sort of funny. He's really scared of himself now. So he needs to rescue himself from this terrible situation. All right. This is tough language, but I think the concepts are clear. So I'm going to keep going. All right. So we're on to the second meditation, the nature of the human mind and the body, and that it is more easily known than the body. So this is second meditation on the mind. I shall proceed by setting aside all of that in which the least doubt could be supposed to exist, just as if I had discovered that it was absolutely false. Shall ever follow in this road till I have met with something which is certain, or at least, if I can do nothing else, to have learned for certain that there is nothing in this world that is certain. Archimedes, in order that he might draw the terrestrial globe out of its place, transport it elsewhere, demanded only that one point should be fixed and immovable. Same way I shall have the right to conceive high hopes if I am happy enough to discover only one thing only which is certain and indubitable. So Descartes needs to find one thing that's certain, and that's going to be how he builds up his foundation of knowledge. So this is like Archimedes. He's moving the world with his lever, and all he needs is one place to stand on. So as we find out, this is sort of contrived. Descartes' one point doesn't provide as great a platform as he thinks it does to build his knowledge. But for the sake of argument, we'll let Descartes find his one point to stand on. Yeah, sorry to keep skipping over you, John, but let's keep going so we can actually get to, yeah, cogito ergo sum. Go for it. All right. But I was persuaded that there is nothing in all the world, that there is no heaven, no earth, or no minds, nor any bodies. Was I not then likewise persuaded that I did not exist? Not at all. Of a surety, I myself did exist, since I persuaded myself of something, merely because I thought of something. But there is some deceiver or another, very powerful and very cunning, whoever employs his ingenuity in deceiving me. And without doubt I exist also if he deceives me,
Let him deceive me as much as he will, never cause me to be nothing so long as I think that I am something. So that after having reflected well, carefully examined all things, we must come to the definite conclusion that this proposition, I am, I exist, is necessarily true each time that I pronounce it or that I mentally conceive it. So if he's persuaded that nothing exists, or that he thinks nothing exists, then he is thinking that nothing exists. If someone persuades him that nothing exists, like an evil genius, then he thinks nothing exists. Either way, Descartes is thinking. And as long as he says this statement, either out loud or to himself, I think, I am, it has to be true. Every time he says it. And as long as he can still say it, it's still true. All right, John.
Yeah. OK，so 我会从我们刚才已经在就是第一章的末尾，我们可以看出，就是我知道大家在这边已经有点绕了，在第一章的末尾，似乎笛卡尔说，我们虽然可以实际的或者说出于实际目的的相信神的良善，我们的理性不会出错，但事实上我们的理性却是时时置于一个危险境地。假如不是上帝而是恶魔的攻击的话，那我们的理性时时可能会错误。所以在第一章的末尾，他假设那我们一切的知识都是不可靠的。然后在第二章的开头，笛卡尔就说，那如果一切都是不可靠的，我们有没有办法开始我们的知识论的重新的构建工作呢？于是笛卡尔问自己，我能不能发现一个阿基米德的支点？大家知道阿基米德都说过，给我一个杠杆，我会把地球，给我一根足够长的杠杆和我一个支点，和我可以把地球翘起来。然后呢，笛卡尔就问这个阿基米德的支点应该在哪里？然后呢，他就开始了我们刚才所提到的我思故我在的论证，就是当我们对一切的思考对象都不确定的时候，那我们可以在另外一个层面上，对于我们的思考，是非常确定的。所以说，这样子是笛卡尔试图找到一个确定的，哪怕是只有一点的东西。对，这是笛卡尔的论证的开始。大家现在有问题吗？我相信肯定有很多问题。
All right, seems like there are no questions. Everyone's okay. So let's see. We're unfortunately not gonna be able to cover all of this. Let's get through Descartes' thoughts on thoughts. So, what of thinking? I find here that thought is an attribute that belongs to me. It alone cannot be separated from me. I am, I exist, that is certain. But how often? Just when I think, for it might possibly be the case that if I ceased entirely to think, I should likewise cease altogether to exist. Do not now admit anything which is not necessarily true. Speak accurately. I am not more than a thing which thinks, that is to say, a mind or a soul, or an understanding, or reason, which are terms whose significance was formerly unknown to me. I am, however, a real thing and really exists. What thing? I've answered, a thing which thinks. So he says, all I can say right now is there's a part of me that thinks. He can't say he's anything more than a thinking thing, so he can't say anything about his body, but he can say, I am at the very least a thinking thing, and I may be more. So that's what he said so far. And as we mentioned, Russell says this is actually an overreach. Russell says he should have just said, all I can say is there are thoughts. But I'll let you guys decide for yourself whether this is an overreach or Descartes is justified. All right, continue on. Finally, I am the same who feels, that is to say, who perceives certain things as by the organs of sense, since in truth I see light, I hear noise, I feel heat. It will be said that these phenomena are false and that I am dreaming. Let it be so, still it is at least quite certain, seems to me that I see light, hear noise, and that I feel heat. So he doesn't just think, he also feels. Even if the things he feels aren't based on real things, he definitely does feel. So Descartes has an intuition here that the same mind which is thinking is also feeling. I think a proper skeptic wouldn't allow this, might say that it's mistaken when he thinks it's the same mind that's thinking and feeling. But Descartes just assumes this. And then the last thing that Descartes says on this specific passage about thinking and feeling is, from this time I begin to know what I am with a little more clearness and distinction than before. Nevertheless, it still seems to me I cannot prevent myself from thinking. Corporeal things, its images are framed by thought, which are tested by the senses. I much more distinctly know that obscure part of me which does not come under the imagination. So even though thinking is the only part which can be proven to exist, things that exist in real life seem to be more real. That seems very strange to Descartes. The part that he can't prove seems more real to him than the part that he can. All right, John.
Yeah. 所以说笛卡尔现在在慢慢一步一步扩大他所谓的确定的东西。我们看到一开始确实大家说提不出问题，我也觉得我也有一样的问题。其实这里的论证其实还蛮清楚的，就是他先找到了一个在思考的自己，然后呢，当然思考的东西未必是正确，但思考本身这是确信无疑的。那笛卡尔说，至于思考是确定的，那感觉是不是确定的呢？当然也是确定的，虽然感觉比思考更不可靠。我们感觉的东西，冷啊、热啊，都是相对的，都是可能是错误的。比如说，我们刚刚从一个很冷的房子里走出来，我们会觉得一切东西都是热的，但是我们在感觉这件事情是非常确定的。那最后一段话呢，我其实也没有太明白，但是我觉得我的读法是，似乎笛卡尔仍然在扩大他对确定性的事情的范围，就是说，他说 OK， 那我们现在在考察事情的时候，我们会对一些事情比对另外一些事情有更大的确定性，比如说我们对一些可以摸到的、看得到的东西，比对那些很晦涩的想象。这些东西的确定性上，我们会有更强的把握。那这种把握感是不是一种确定的东西呢？似乎笛卡尔把这种确定性也算在他所谓的知识论的确定的那个根基里。我们再继续往下看论证，然后到现在为止，至少一切清楚吗？
All right, good stuff. So I think the last thing that we'll have time to cover is Descartes' wax example. So let us take, for example, this piece of wax. It's been taken quite freshly from the hive and has not yet lost the sweetness of the honey which it contains. It still retains somewhat of the odor of flowers from which it has been culled. Its color, its figure, its size are apparent. It's hard, cold, easily handled. If you strike it with the finger, it will emit a sound. Finally, all the things which are requisite to cause us distinctly to recognize body are met within it. But notice that while I speak and approach the fire, what remains of the taste is exhaled, smell evaporates, color alters, figure is destroyed, the size increases, it becomes liquid, heats, scarcely one can handle it. When one strikes it, no sound is emitted. Does the same wax remain after this change? We must confess that it remains, none would judge otherwise. What then did I know so distinctly in this piece of wax? So to say very, very straightforwardly, even as the wax goes through physical transformations, and here are, instead of a wax from a hive, I have wax from a candle, even as it melts, we still recognize it as the same piece of wax. But it smells different, it looks different. So why do we recognize it as the same piece of wax still? So let us attentively consider this. Abstracting from all that does not belong to the wax, let us see what remains. Certainly nothing remains excepting a certain extended thing, which is flexible and movable. What's the meaning of flexible and movable? Not that I imagine that this piece of wax being round is capable of being square and of passing from a square to a triangular figure. No, certainly it is not that. Since I imagine it admits of an infinitude of similar changes, nevertheless do not know how to compass the infinitude by my imagination. Consequently, this conception, which I have the wax, is not brought about by the faculty of imagination. So, Descartes says, I can't say that I recognize the same piece of wax just because I can imagine it, because I can imagine this changing to this. So this is it's a weird argument because he says sensing is not the same thing as imagining. He says there must be some separate mental process going on. So I guess what we would say now is he'd say we recognize the wax intuitively. Meanwhile, imagination is conscious thinking. But I don't think we would accept quite a strict distinction as Descartes makes here. All right. Yeah, John, do you want to just quickly explain intuition versus imagination?
对，然后Trevor 刚才又回到了之前的那个关于蜡的论证，就是说，当蜡在融化的时候，然后它变成了另外一个蜡，但是我们仍然会认为它是同样一个物质。那我们到底是用所谓的想象力，还是用直观来取得这样子关于蜡是同样一块蜡的这个知识呢？那笛卡尔是否定说他是通过想象力的，因为他说我们无法进行想象这种无穷的变化，因为我们想象力，因为完全无法用想象力来进行这样子一个无穷的模拟。当然，这个想法我也觉得是很奇怪的。然后我觉得我们还是继续看下面的证明。Yeah.
All right. So let's see if we can actually finish this up. All right. What must particularly be observed is that its perception is neither an act of vision, nor of touch, nor of imagination. It has never been such, although it may have appeared formerly to be so, but only an intuition of the mind, which may be imperfect and confused, as it was formerly, or clear and distinct, as it is at present, according as my attention is more or less directed to the elements which are found in it, which it is composed. So he's saying basically here, he's recognizing it as the same wax just because of the material. He's just looking towards the material, and he's not basing it on vision or touch or imagination. Only this intuition of the mind of what wax is actually made up of. So here he has this great example. For we say that not that we see the same wax if it is present, and not that we simply judge that it is the same from it having the same color and figure. From this I should conclude that I knew the wax by means of vision, and not simply by the intuition of the mind. Lest by chance I remember that when looking from a window, seeing I see men who pass in the street, I really do not see them, but infer that what I see is men, just as I say that I see wax. And yet, what do I see from the window but hats and coats which may cover automatic machines? Yet I judge these to be men. So he says he recognizes a piece of wax as the same piece of wax by an unconscious mental process, just as the same way that he'd see a figure like this as a person, even though you can't actually see a face or anything that would reflect that it's a person. It's possible that these are just some mannequin, right? Some mannequin, shoes, dress, umbrella, purse. But he says it's by intuition that I see it's a person. Another way that we would describe it now is induction, that every time you've seen hats and coats, it's been men. and that if there were machines that walked around like that, Descartes wouldn't be quite so sure. So in that sense, Descartes doesn't consider an alternative explanation here. All right, let's finish this out, and then actually, yeah, John, do you want to do quick translation?
Yeah, just one quick question.
Yeah.
Would he say that we were judged as men passing by our intuition?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
his idea is that just in the same way his intuition about the wax, his unconscious mental process allowed him to recognize the same.
Yeah.
Unconscious mental process allows him to recognize hats and coat as men walking down the street.
所以这是一个很有意思的一个认识论中的例子，就是我们怎么能相信我们看到的东西构建起来的那个实体是我们所谓的构建起来的实体呢？我们怎么能判断出窗外的那个穿着衣服的有头有脸的经过的东西它是一个人呢？但是我们经常的常识让我们这样判断。那笛卡尔说，这个判断绝对不是基于视觉，不是基于想象力，不是基于任何的东西，而是基于一种笛卡尔叫 intuition， 叫直觉的东西，是这个直觉告诉我们这个东西是一团蜡，而这个走过的东西是一个人，基本上不会错。所以我们是相信这个笛卡尔所谓 intuition 的东西。但是至于大家认为这个判断的东西是不是 intuition， 我觉得大家可以自己思考。对，清楚了吗？
All right. I think we're good. Let's last bit, meditation 2. And then we'll be set. But finally, here I am, having insensibly reverted to the point I desired. For since it is now manifest to me that even bodies are not properly speaking known by the senses or by the faculty of imagination, by the understanding only. And since they are not known from the fact they are seen or touched, but only because they are understood, see clearly that there is nothing which is easier for me to know than my mind. So he started this whole way of thinking by wondering why his mind seems less real to him than things in the outside world. He says, I can prove my mind, I can't prove outside world. Why does the outside world seem more real? His answer ultimately that he only knows things in the outside world through his mind. So this paradox doesn't actually exist. And by the way, this is a major step in philosophy, in Western philosophy, because from Descartes onwards, philosophy starts to turn inwards towards the mind and towards subjective truth, towards your own perception, versus what's happening in the outside world. So this paragraph here marks a big change in Western philosophy. All right, I think that makes sense. So let's do last outline and then our conclusion. So how did Descartes argue? He has rigorous deductive logic, and he also bases it all on a fundamental belief in God, which is we didn't get to yet, but it's pretty interesting. It's everything is rigorous and deductive except for this fundamental belief in God. So conclusion. So it's easy to see why Russell calls Descartes the first modern philosopher. Radical skepticism and building up from first principles are really impressive, even if what he does after that, after he tears down everything, isn't good. So he's much better at being a wrecking ball than at being a builder. However, unbeknownst to Descartes, however, he didn't know this. While he was becoming the first philosopher, he was also the start of a division between philosophy and science, and he fails to unify mathematics and philosophy like he wanted to. So he has a he raises these deep, difficult questions and then fails to answer them. These questions are still problems for philosophy and perhaps even fundamental challenges for philosophy. They might even make us question what philosophy is in the first place. One thing that he definitely starts for philosophy is a focus and a privileging of the mind over all else, especially over the body and the outside world. So after Descartes, philosophy is inward and abstract. All right, John, quick translation of our conclusion.
Yeah，刚才 Trevor 有一个很重要的评价，就是说，当然我们知道，就之前笛卡尔一直在聊，我们对这个世界、对知识的确定性不存在于我们理解的东西之上，存在于我们理解这个东西的理解之中。所以说呢，这个很大程度上是一个从对象到认知过程的一个审视的一个转向，大家明白吗？就是之前我们在思考一个东西，或者说我们思考的一只兔子，我们看见的一个杯子是不是可靠？那现在呢，笛卡尔说我们更应该去思考的是我们看到这个东西这个过程和我们理解，比如说一道数学题，这个思维过程本身的可靠性。然后这是一个哲学很重要的转向，就是从对外部世界从经验世界到理智的世界，转向内部世界，也就是转向我们的理解行为本身的这样子对理解行为本身检视的一个过程。这个转向是一个从外部到内部的一个很重要的哲学转向。Yeah.
All right, great. So that's it for Rene Descartes. Thank you very much. Sorry for starting late. Sorry for ending late. But yeah, hope you guys are now enlightened. And I'll stick around for a couple minutes for any questions, and then see you guys on Wednesday, where we'll talk about Hume. All right. All right. I don't understand why I think is a certain thing. Why can we be sure sense is certain when we believe I think is a certain thing? So why I think is a certain thing is like Descartes, remember, he's trying to attack everything that he believes to be true. And so when he's attacking everything that he believes to be true, he says, imagine I'm either a huge idiot and know literally nothing, or imagine, on the other hand, there's some demon who's just trying to mess with me all the time. The most he could ever do is make me think wrong things. Or if I was a huge idiot, I would be thinking wrong things. Either way, I'm still thinking. So we know for sure that we're thinking. I'm not sure what your second question means. We're not certain that sense is certain. We know we do feel things. We don't know if what we feel exists in the outside world. So that's something that we can know. We know our feelings. Hope that answered your questions. Can't sleep well tonight. You'll be thinking about the problems of Descartes. He thinks nothing is metaphysics. No. Remember, metaphysics is the roots of his tree. So that's he is a believer in the existence of metaphysics. So yeah, that whenever you think, you definitely exist. You might exist when you're not thinking. You might exist when you're not thinking.
But you are sure you are existing when you are thinking.
Exactly. And Descartes would say, practically speaking, you're probably existing at other points. Remember, he starts this whole thing with saying, this is just a thought experiment. I'm just doing this to convince non-Christians. Like really, you know, I know that none of this is like real. So, all right. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? If you guys do have other questions, you can put them in QQ chat or Reddit. Descartes questions and examples of how you should answer the Descartes questions will also be on Reddit very soon. And thank you very much. Always a pleasure. And I will see you in a couple days. Bye-bye.